Hello and welcome to episode 116 of Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast where two friends stopped arguing about movies and started working through them together. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. It's Hanksgiving, that special time of year where we give thanks for Tom Hanks. This year, we're continuing our gap year by watching The Burbs, an early career comedy thriller from 1989 directed by Joe Dante. While The Burbs isn't one of Hanks' forgotten 80s movies, it isn't as wildly popular as some of the other movies that helped launch his career. That being said, over the decades, The Burbs has found a strong fan base who consider it to be a forgotten classic.
Audiences and critics in 1989 were not so taken with The Burbs. While it made nearly $50 million worldwide, a respectable haul, critics were ambivalent, but generally down on the kooky film. Over time, people have grown to appreciate the weirdness and ambitious special effects, and seek to bring it out from the shadow of more widely accepted films like Gremlins and Edward Scissorhands. Dante's vision of the suburbs might not have landed in the late 80s, but in the subsequent 34 years, his neighbors from hell might unfortunately have become more relevant than he and screenwriter Dana Olson could have known.
But do we need another examination of the dark corners of suburbia?
Or is this like a green sky at night, and the Burbs should take flight? Keep listening.
Hey, what time does the ball game go on?
I think it's at about 1. Hey, you want to go down to the deli and get one of those beef sandwiches?
No. Thinking of going and getting one of those electric garage door openers and installing them.
Ray, come here. What is it?
It's my neighbor.
Hey, one of the Huns came out of the cave.
So that is Ray, played by the man himself, Tom Hanks.
The reason for the season.
Talking to his neighbor, Art, played by Rick Ducommun.
That's how I'm going to say it.
Okay.
Ducommun sounds right to me.
And you've got it all. That's kind of a microcosm there of this movie. You've got the suburban mundanity, ball game, electric garage door openers, and then you've got the suspicion, the sort of like, I don't know if you would say this is a horror movie, but it's definitely got elements of
like camp horror.
Yeah,
almost.
yeah. Where the mysterious neighbors, who may or may not be satanic occultists,
At the very least, murderers, though, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's no doubt about that in their minds.
Yeah.
And they make an appearance.
What's great about that scene also is that you're kind of introduced to all three of the main players in this sort of weird investigation that they're taking on themselves. Because Bruce Dern does come in as well as the Mark Rumsfeld kind of ex-veteran or ex-military character.
Well, let Veterans Day right around the corner as we record this.
Wow, there's just so many reasons to watch this movie.
Yeah.
But of course, this is Hanksgiving.
Yeah.
So we're kind of doing all of these through the lens of Tom Hanks and what he brings to the movie, where this was sort of in his career, and sort of how it looks this many years later as we've come to know Tom Hanks. I mean, this movie's over 30 years old now. This was from 1989.
Yes, yeah, it's almost 35.
Yeah.
35 next year.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Time sure does fly.
It does. So of course, yes. Happy Hanksgiving.
Yes. Happy Hanksgiving to you as well.
And we kind of talked about it at the end of the last episode that we had kind of encountered some people who couldn't believe we hadn't seen The Burbs.
There were people, and they were usually around my age, where they would either say a line from the movie, and I would always kind of sheepishly be like, I never saw that movie. And then you'd always get the, what? No, you got to see that movie.
Right.
Because for whatever reason, it had been a part of their life growing up, and it just never was a part of mine. But did you have experiences like that, or is that just me?
No, I had, and but I mean, not a ton of people.
Right. No, this is like a very
very select community. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about a neighborhood-sized group of people who
right. Not even.
Yeah.
Cul-de-sac size.
Cul-de-sac, sure. A very specific group of people. And it was, I mean, when we did the episode on A League of Their Own, I hadn't seen that. And that was much more egregious.
Yeah.
How have you not seen A League of Their Own?
No, this is more like I would say this really fits the definition of that cult classic kind of thing.
You need to give it a shot.
And it was also a very specific type of friend that I have where I love their sense of humor. I love I have really good like related taste in humor.
Right.
And for them to kind of be like, this is actually a funny movie you should watch, I would be like, oh, I really should give that a shot, even though it doesn't seem like it's one of Tom Hanks's like really blowout huge celebrity performances.
Right.
I mean, maybe we should talk about where this kind of fits within Hank's filmography.
Well, I'm looking at the list. This is a year after Big.
Right. So that was a big movie,
Very good. Very good.
But seriously though, like that, like everybody knows Big, not everybody knows the Burbs, and this was after that. So he already had reached that celebrity status.
Yep.
And this was kind of in the middle of it.
Yeah, I wonder where it was in like the making of the movie, like whether he made Big and then did the Burbs, or if those were all sort of happening at the same time. Because we're looking at this list. 89, he also was in Turner and Hooch that year.
Another movie that I feel like is just a little bit, more known than the Burbs.
I agree.
Yeah.
And then 1990, he did Joe versus the Volcano. Not all that well known.
Right.
And then Bonfire of the Vanities, which is very notorious.
So is this sort of the beginning of a bit of a Hanks slump in a way?
A bit of a dip,
A bit of a dip. Maybe dip's a better word. Slump sounds too negative for the season.
Right. Yeah, we wouldn't want to do that. And then Radio Flyer. He didn't make a movie in 1991. And then we got Radio Flyer and A League of Their Own come out in 1992. All
right.
So it's, if anything, it's the calm before the storm. Maybe we'll call it. Of like Hanks just catapulting.
I was just thinking about this because, well, by the time the Burbs comes around, he's already proven himself as a leading man. Mm-hmm. Now, I got to go way back. Was Tom Hanks, was he ever not a leading man? It seems like he just kind of comes out of the gate.
Right? Because Splash was his first movie.
And he's the lead.
Right. Bosom Buddies, of course, was where he made his kind of name. And then Splash, he's the male lead. Same year, he was in Bachelor Party, which I've never think seen that he's one. The lead. I think that's more of an ensemble. Okay. I haven't seen it either. And I'll be honest, there are a lot of 80s Hanks that I have not seen. Man with One Red Shoe, Volunteers, The Money Pit.
I've heard really good things about The Money Pit.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yeah, like people who like the Burbs
would
like the Money Pit.
Okay. So it feels like this was sort of make or break time. So he's got his Oscar nomination for Big. Didn't win.
I'm curious, who did he lose to?
So he lost to Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man, which,
well,
what are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly.
But still, you're coming off your first Oscar nomination. What are you going to do next? And then The Burbs comes out. Right. And who knows? I don't know what they would have thought at the time. And I just never thought to see it. I knew about it because it would be on TV. And I would see the commercials for it, and it just didn't strike me as, that's not what Tom Hanks does. Like, it's kind of a horror movie, and he wouldn't do that. And so I never watched it, and I always just sort of like judged it based on that, I guess.
Yeah, and this was sort of my feeling, and I feel like it was sort of confirmed when I read Roger Ebert's review of this, which maybe we'll get a little bit more into that as we dig into the movie a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But the way he was kind of making comparisons to movies like, he obviously compared it to Gremlins because that's Joe Dante, but he compared it to like Beetlejuice. And even if you just look at like the poster or anything, right, which is all I really ever knew, and it kind of just looked to me like it was sort of doing a similar kind of thing, but I was just such a huge Tim Burton fan that I was like, Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands, they're doing it better.
I don't need the Burbs.
I don't need the Burbs. I love Tom Hanks, but it didn't necessarily compute to me him being in a movie like that.
Right.
In the way that like Michael Keaton fits in with Beetlejuice or Johnny Depp fits in with Edward Scissorhands and that whole cast of people. It
just was incongruous, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I had heard enough of the score from the commercials and stuff to know the vibe. And it very much felt like that sort of 80s benignly creepy, campy, like you said. And I was never a huge fan of that as a kid.
Sure.
And then certainly, that's not where Tom Hanks lives.
In your mind.
In my mind. Right.
Mind. Well, we always talk about his versatility.
We do.
And the way his range.
So
let's maybe get into our thoughts on the movie and Tom Hanks in it. I'm curious to know your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Like a letterbox rating, my thoughts?
Sure, let's do that. Let's start with that. That's a good place to start.
My gut on finishing it put it at 3.5. But as I was driving over here, as I've thought about it since I finished it, I was kind of like, maybe I like it more than that.
Yeah. It's weird. I had a very similar experience. I would have said more 3.5. And then, thinking about it and just realizing that I kind of laughed a lot in this movie. I thought it was really funny.
Yeah. I did too.
And there are parts of it that maybe seem a little messy, a little slapdash in a way.
That's what I'm sort of sorting through. Is that part of the charm, or is it?
I don't know.
Against it?
But I can certainly see, if I was in high school when I had seen this, it would have become one of those movies that you would bond over with people. And the one-liners in this, like, man, I could see myself just wanting to watch this movie again. Like, just have it on.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I read a write-up of it from the Reader, which was kind of, the Reader was suggesting this as something to do. I don't know when the review came out, but somebody was showing this special showing at a theater. I'm like, that would have been a really great way to see this.
With a group of people that love it.
With people who love it in the theater would have been really fun. I probably would have been like way more up on the movie rather than the way I watched it, which was in 3 different parts because we have a 4-week-old baby at our house right now, and everything in our life is divided and split up, and we're doing it in bits and pieces. So not the way the movie was intended to be seen. And I could definitely, I was like, oh yeah, that would have been the way to see it. Yeah,
totally. I think that this is one of those movies that even if you watched it alone, it's going to grow if you've got a group of people you can reminisce about with it. This to me feels like it's the kind of movie that would sit comfortably next to a movie, say like, for me, like Billy Madison or Happy Gilmore, where it's like, critics don't love this movie. It's kind of stupid.
Well, it sits in in that weird spot, and this happens a lot with funny art that's somewhat self-aware, in that if you take it too seriously, you won't enjoy it.
Right.
But if you write it off as goofy or bad, you're not getting it. And so you have to take it seriously enough to respect it, but not so seriously that you can't laugh at what it's doing, because it's like, we know, like that was the joke. Like if you've ever, I feel like this happens to me a lot, where if I'm like around people who don't know me and I make a joke that like is an intentionally stupid thing and somebody like corrects you on it, you're like, well, I know. Like that's why I said it. And that to me is how I could, especially watching it on my own, miss what the movie's doing.
Right.
Like the scene where it zooms in and out while they're screaming.
With the dog?
Yeah. Well, they do it with the dog, but there's also like Art and Ray.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's so dumb. And it's like, yeah, it is dumb. That's why they did it.
Yes, exactly.
And some of the over the top sort of things. So
what's funny is, to me, like that part you're talking about where they do the zoom in, zoom out as they're screaming. Like, to me, that's like
like Wayne's World.
Yes, and it's sort of like a dad joke of filmmaking.
Yeah, right.
You know, like it's the kind of thing where it's just like, we know it's bad, we know it's stupid. That's what's so great about it. That's what's so funny about this.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And you're missing.
And if you can't find yourself laughing at it, then just relax a little bit.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so there are ways where it's like, can we take this movie too seriously? Probably. Like if we can be like, oh no, it knows what it's doing, so everything it's doing is doing this.
Right.
But also know that it is doing something. So I think that might be our task today, is to sort of unpack those sorts of things. And for me, one vibe I got early on was a little bit of a Shaun of the Dead vibe. Of it is kind of how the movie establishes at the beginning in Shaun of the Dead, how Shaun and Ed are just sort of floating through life, and they're really unaware of how they have become part of the machinations of mundane life, and they're just floating through.
Yeah.
Where to Tom Hanks, as the movie begins, he's taking a week's vacation
from a job that we don't
know anything. It's not important.
It's just a mundane job, like
some job that you can take a week of vacation from in the summer.
You know, this is someone who they live in this kind of neighborhood. You can already, and it's just very obvious that they probably work some corporate job that you don't.
Not even
you don't
that
need
it's
to
a
know
high level
anything.
stress job.
Just,
not like that he's getting away from something. He's just taking a week off, and he clearly needs it. But he's not going to the lake. He's not going fishing. His plan is to stay home. Is he going to build something with the new tools? Who knows? He's going to put in an electric garage door? Maybe.
Those are the bits that are so great, though, because they really develop what this movie thinks about sort of that suburban dad character. And it's very relatable, like just being really excited about new tools and who knows if you'll actually ever use them. But that's the kind of thing that you would show off to your neighbor.
Right, yeah. Did you see these? He didn't even buy them. His wife's dad got them for him. He's not like...
And then his neighbor's just like, oh, those are beautiful. And it's like kind of not even really paying attention
he didn't even really look at them. Yeah. And it's just kind of showing they have been stifled by this mundanity and they don't even know it.
Yeah. Yep.
And I wouldn't say it necessarily does as much with that as Shaun of the Dead does. We're like, look, we're all zombies already, that when the zombie apocalypse happened, we didn't even know it. But it's just, this is where these characters are. They're stuck in this suburban rut and let's see what happens. Like when something interesting or different happens, how do they react? I don't know how much that does to clarify the movie because I don't think there's at any point where we're supposed to know where we are with these characters. Are we on their side? Are we criticizing them? Are they bad? Are they pitiable? And that might be where audiences and critics didn't connect with it because the movie is just sort of saying like, well, I don't know. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah. Oh, what do you think? You know? Yeah, because I think the movie is not shy about its take on the environment and the burbs.
Right.
I mean, the movie never leaves the street.
Right.
You never get anywhere outside of that cul-de-sac. It's pretty clear that it's probably not even shot on location, that this is just like a studio kind of like it looks entirely fabricated.
It is. That was the street and the house they used for the Munsters, for Leave It to Beaver.
Sure. Yeah,
that is the studio suburban lot.
Right. This is a fabricated American ideal.
Yeah.
Almost to the point it's like so fabricated that it even matches what you've seen in the movies as far as like what a studio lot type neighborhood street should look like.
Right.
You know? And then the house that they're suspicious of, it just looks like a different type of cinematic idea of what that type of house looks like. It's like the Addams Family house, you know, like it's playing in very broad strokes, but what it's actually satirizing is mundanity and boredom
and what that does to a person.
And what that does to people. You know, is it because it's maybe one of the earlier entries into that type of statement, which we would see a ton of later? I mean, you have American Beauty eventually wins Best Picture, you know, for this type of thing.
Well, and David Lynch had done it like 3 years earlier with Blue Velvet.
Sure, yeah, that's true.
Very different.
Yeah.
Very different type of movie.
But is it one of those things where because it's an earlier depiction of this, that it's still kind of feeling its way around the right way to do that? Yeah. Or is it very intentional about, no, I'm not going to really tell you necessarily what to think about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing or...
Right,
you know,
versus... Edward Scissorhands a year later, which was like, no, the disruption to the sameness is a good thing. Like,
yes,
they needed to let Edward into their lives and look how it could transform them and break someone out of this sort of mundanity.
Right. Or it was in that one, it's also a statement of like suburbia creates a scenario in which you are completely unable to accept anyone who doesn't fit that mold.
Well,
you know?
so is this movie.
And so is this movie. It just doesn't seem to hammer it or care as much about that idea as it does about the perspective more of the dads.
And the way it ends makes it even harder to know whether or not you're supposed to be with them.
Right.
Like, so we're going to ruin the ending. What happens is they kind of break into this house and they're looking for the dead bodies.
The evidence.
And they don't find it and they end up accidentally blowing the house up.
Right.
And they realize that they were wrong. There wasn't anything to look for.
Right.
And then when Tom Hanks is in the ambulance, Henry Gibson, who plays the doctor character of this German, like some sort of European, not Slavic family, then gets in the ambulance ready to kill Race because he believes he saw the bodies that he had buried there. So they weren't right, and then they were right. And what's the lesson? I think that's the part of it.
Yeah. I can't tell if it's frustrating or smart. Because the movie could have just ended a lot cleaner if it would have just ended with Hank's speech and then maybe just being thrown in the ambulance, cut to credits or something.
Right, exactly,
you know?
yeah.
Which that speech is, we should just play it. That speech is great. It's a great Hanks performance. It's so funny.
It's Crazy Hanks. I love Crazy Hanks.
So good.
We haven't seen Crazy Hanks in a long time.
Yeah.
And that's something that we miss from the 80s.
Yes.
Find the rest of that skeleton to go with that femur. Oh, it might not be Walter, but it's going to be some sort of torture.
Shut up, Art! Shut up! God, you don't know when to quit, do you? Look at me! I'm a shell of a man because of you, Art. You leave! Now! Soldiers! You leave them alone! Get off their case already! They didn't do anything to us! They didn't do anything to us! All right, so they're different, so they keep to themselves! Can you blame them? They live next door to people who break into their house and burn it down while they're gone for the day! Remember what you were saying about people in the burbs, Art? People like Skip? People who mow their lawn for the 800th time and then snap? Well, that's us! It's not them! That's us! We're the ones who are vaulting over the fences and peeking in through people's windows. We're the ones who are throwing garbage in the street and lighting fires. We're the ones who are acting suspicious and paranoid. We're the lunatics! Us! It's not them! It's us.
Crazy Hanks. There's nothing like 80s Crazy Hanks.
Yeah, but you have a clean ending there, and the lesson is very clear. Don't judge people who are different than you.
Yeah.
We were the ones who were the bad ones here, basically. That's the lesson. That's a good lesson.
Yeah.
Not a bad one. Go ahead and end it. And then it's just like, no, actually, their suspicions were right.
They were right.
They were right the whole time. They really did murder the people who owned the house before them.
But also, they're wrong.
But they're wrong.
And they were over paranoid. And they were suspicious of people who were different from them, which is inherently a bad thing.
And most of the evidence they thought pointed to them being terrible was actually not bad at all.
Right.
And and then the funny part is like, yeah, you know, they were a murderous family, but they were also nice. I mean, they drove Walter were they the ones that drove him to the hospital, or they at least got the mail?
They were collecting his mail, and Ray looked like the creep by leaving a letter, "I have your dog,"
right,
when he was trying to be nice. I guess if there's a takeaway, it's just sort of that, like, if you are given over to mundanity and satisfied with it, your brain's going to look for ways to break out of it.
Yep.
That won't be healthy.
But it does make these types of decisions where I'm like, that's sort of an interesting thing to say as well. Like the whole Corey Feldman character, who is just sort of watching this from afar.
Yeah.
As if this is entertainment.
Yeah.
I don't know if at the time it was something being said about the younger generation, or if it was just, but I think even now a certain critical statement could be made about just sort of sitting on the sidelines and watching this as if it's just fun entertainment.
Right. It's a very serious paper could be written about this, it feels like, where you've got, because I mean, writers wouldn't put in the detail about Bruce Dern's character being a military veteran flippantly. Right. Presumably a Vietnam vet, right? Like he talks about that? Or does he talk about Korea? There's definitely like Vietnam overtones. Like this guy has not left the military behind. His xenophobic tinged excitement. Definitely something that tends to happen in wars is that you've got to demonize the enemy in order to not care
when you're
about
killing
what is happening. And so you could say, like, he found meaning in that point in his life, and he's tried to continue that. He starts his day by hanging the flag every day, but he's got it on a push button. He is also very suburban, and he cares about a dog pooping on his lawn. And then you've got that coupled with the really sort of impotent life of Ray and Art. Art's just eating his way through everybody's house. Ray doesn't know what he wants. He doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't want to spend his vacation with anything. He just doesn't care about any of that sort of stuff. These older generations are at this place where they aren't finding meaning.
Or don't even know that they should be searching for it.
Right. They're not even aware that they don't have meaning in their life. And then you've got Corey Feldman's character and his friends, who are the younger generation, which we tend to imbue with hope, who are just content to watch and goad. Like sort of like, yeah, let's do this thing.
Yeah, like it would,
and then
won't this be fun? Won't this be funny?
Once there are any stakes, then they order their pizza and they sit back and they watch it. And that's a danger for every generation. Yeah. The negative things, the meaninglessness from the past is being perpetuated, and the younger generations are content to sit back and laugh at it.
And is there something being said about what the suburbs does to the younger generation? Like, I feel like Corey Feldman's character kind of understands that these guys are kind of pathetic.
Yeah.
I mean, and so there's a clarity that he has, but it doesn't translate to any sort of action, or it's just sort of sitting there and watching it unfold as entertainment, which is something that the Burbs gives you the privilege to do. You know, you don't have to worry so much about any sort of external other force that would actually make you be actionable about anything.
Right.
Mr. Rumsfeld, you guys managed to knock out the power in the entire block. Probably the whole south end of town.
Ricky, shut up!
Listen, man, we're gonna make a run to McDee's. You want a quarter pounder or something?
Oh, no way! Hey, wait, you guys can't go now. It's the best part. I called the pizza dude.
All right.
So there's some pretty serious stuff potentially happening here. Not to mention that when you have a life that's so free of conflict, you make it up.
Yeah.
So what's the point of having a conflict-free life if you're going to get super angry at your neighbor when their dog poops on your yard? Or when you're going to, start inventing conspiracies and then they end up being real. Yeah. I don't know. I felt when I was the first time I watched the first chunk and then I stopped it and I was kind of processing and I was like, why isn't this movie more popular? Because it does feel so in line with Beetlejuice and with, even Gremlins. And so I just wonder if this movie is just not as palatable to people. Or how did you react to the more horror style of it?
The horror style was what made me think this is really it's a dark comedy. I don't know if everyone's going to laugh at the scene where they're in the house talking to them, but that is such a funny scene. But it's funny in the way that like you might chuckle a little bit at Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Rosemary's Baby. I could see where, because it also goes in sort of a darker direction, and the comedy it's satirical.
Yep.
It's like a satire and a dark comedy. So you've got a couple different types of things working against it for a large, huge audience. But there's going to be a few people who I think really click with it and understand exactly what the comedy is doing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I did read Ebert's review. I don't know if you read it.
I did.
And he wasn't too hot on this movie.
No.
But I also feel like I don't know if he's really getting it.
Right. Which is rare for him.
Yeah.
Matt Singer has a new book coming out about Siskel and Ebert. And I saw a video where he was talking about some of the things that he picked up by rewatching all of the episodes that he could. And he said they really didn't like Tom Hanks in the 80s.
Really?
Like, they never really gave a Tom Hanks movie a positive review in the 80s. He just seemed to rub them both the wrong way, which is a little bit funny in hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, the last part of his review where he says, quote, "It's hard to put your finger on exactly what's missing from the movie. The actors do what they can with the material and the special effects are ambitious, but somehow the film fails to rouse itself into any real conviction. It's cut and dried. We anticipate the major events in the story and we're right. And when the explanation for the strange family's behavior finally arrives, it's not much of a surprise." And it's like, yeah, that's true, I guess. I mean,
this is one of the reviews where he kind of wishes for a different movie to be made.
Yeah.
Later on, he said, maybe that's what the movie was missing, a comic inversion to undermine all of our expectations. But I feel like it is doing that.
Right.
A movie like this, which gets so off the rails, is juggling a lot of oranges.
Yeah.
And it may not land every one of them. Like, they may not all fall correctly, but enough of them are, and it's intentional enough that I wouldn't say that the movie is failing at what it's trying to do. It's just really unique in what it is doing, and not everybody's ready for it.
Like, this was sort of an early foray into this, and so maybe it just wasn't as polished as what we would come to expect later. Because I was going to mention, there's this other article I read in The Guardian that was about the Burbs at 30, and this person was a really big fan of the movie. The author Charles Bramesco, and he actually brings up the Ebert review at the very end, and he says, quote, "In his review of the original release, Dean of American Film Critics Roger Ebert dinged what he perceived as a lack of historical context. Quote, it seems recycled out of fairly ancient ideas of what the suburbs are really like. I kept expecting to see Dennis the Menace or Mr. Wilson wandering down the street." That was a quote from the Ebert review. And I kind of had the same thought where I'm just like, yeah, isn't that kind of the point? Like, and then he's this person who wrote this Charles who wrote the Guardian review then continues, "Sincerest apologies to the Ebert estate, but surely the director knew what he was doing."
Yeah.
A full decade before American Beauty picked up a Best Picture statuette for portraying the suburbs as a hellacious prison of middle age, Dante had made his peace with them as a locus of unease for aging boomers, nervous about their generation's slide out of radicalism. He's writing the neighborhood as an idea and social ecosystem rather than a geography, making the distinction between actual houses and the rows of colonial facades lined up like an Old West soundstage, the difference being the suburbs and the burbs.
Right.
Like, is that really what critics were missing at the time, was this idea of like treating the suburbs as a social construct and also like a dark comedy horror.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's put it in the neighborhood of Dennis the Menace.
Right. To me, that's what the inversion was, taking the suburbs we all know and just not changing it.
Yeah.
That's part of what Dante's doing. He's like, I don't need to tweak it to make it horrifying. That's the point.
Right.
And Ebert also hated Blue Velvet. Like, I don't know what was going on with Ebert in the 80s in the suburbs, but he seemed to not like or get.
It's like he didn't understand it almost.
Yeah. It's almost I'm not knocking Edward Scissorhands at all. I know that's like
certainly
one of
hope you aren't.
One of your influential movies and that sort of thing. But it's almost like if Dante had been like, look, the houses all look the same, the yards all look the same. Look, this is an extreme version. This is an exaggerated version of suburbia. Now look how horrifying it is. Maybe people would have been on board more, whatever. Ebert, we don't need to keep talking about Ebert specifically and trying to understand where he was coming from. But it's one of the things that just has maybe made this movie kind of go by the wayside, because you need to look at what we all accept as normal and say, yeah, I guess that's kind of weird. It's weird that we do this.
This many years later, I wonder if it would get a better reception if more people just saw it, because I feel like this type of portrayal of, I guess, just portraying the suburbs as what they are. Maybe it took the recession. I don't know what it was. I feel like there was something that happened sort of after 2008 or 2000, where we were just sort of, like, yeah, you don't have to necessarily create this this Monopoly House style suburbia to make a critique of how suburbia is all the same.
Right.
Just show it. We know it. We get it. Like, it's empty enough if you just show people living in the suburbs.
Yeah, that's entirely possible that maybe the suburbs had been a salvation.
Yeah, I think you're still in the thick of where people are really seeing the suburbs as a place of promise.
Yeah.
And this is an early thing saying it's not as promising as you think.
Right.
And it also turns people into weird people.
Yeah. It normalizes behavior that we should not normalize. And we need the variety and the conflict, and we're gonna manufacture it.
Yeah.
And so it's entirely possible that following the inflation issues of the 70s, in 1989, you're like, our lives are stable. And if not just stable, we're all kind of on the upswing. We all, quote unquote.
Right.
The people like Ray Peterson are on the upswing.
Yeah.
What's wrong with this? And Joe Dante's like, a lot's wrong with it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because you could very much see, like, you don't get the sense.
Or Dana Olson.
Yeah, the scriptwriter, Dana Olson. Like, you don't get the sense that, like, any of these people were, like, born into wealth. It seems like this is something that they accumulated for themselves, and in their minds, at least, I'm sure.
Yeah, right.
They don't really get into it in the movie.
No.
But, like,
and they don't need to.
And they really don't. That would be kind of a tangent. But I think to try to understand that, like, in 1989, I could, like you're saying, I could really see where, like, most people really still did see, like, if you're living in the suburbs, like, that's good for you, man.
Yeah,
like, you got there. Like, we should be celebrating that. There's nothing not to celebrate about this. This is a place where people who maybe didn't grow up into wealth, they can find a decent job and find a good neighborhood and a good school system and raise their family and
get a multi-level house with an electric garage door opener. And
like, what could possibly be wrong with that? And then you've got kind of, maybe they just saw him as a killjoy, like Joe Dante coming in as a killjoy and being like, yeah, but you're not really seeing some of the stuff that happens underneath all that.
Yeah.
That's just part of human nature, no matter what environment you're in.
Yeah.
And I think now we're just like, yeah, of course that's correct.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's shorthand now. If you show suburban life, quiet suburban life, you're like, oh, okay, this is going to go bad.
It was all over the place in the 2000s. We mentioned American Beauty, but you also had, like, Desperate Housewives,
right,
and all this television as well. Mad Men. You could even maybe say the same thing to a degree about Breaking Bad. Even just that we all of these series that came out taking place in the suburbs, and
even The Sopranos being a suburban.
it was
show,
a suburban.
right?
It was a suburban gangster show. You know, like it's just. I think today's audience would be much more open or just understanding
idea,
of what the Burbs is trying to do.
Yeah, it does feel like if people would watch it now, they would be probably more on board with it. I think one issue they could run into is my knee-jerk reaction, which is like, well, we already have Edward Scissorhands.
Right.
Like, I don't know why I need the Burbs. But I think one thing also that we haven't talked about that Charles Vermesco brought up in his write-up and was something that I noticed, especially in some of the performance choices in the scenes, is just how immature these quote-unquote men are. And they are heads of household. They are the people who are running society, and they are just little boys. And if you didn't get that, you've got the scene where Tom Hanks isn't allowed to go out with them. And Carrie Fisher's just telling him, like, no, like he's staying home today. And Bruce Dern's just got his hands in front of his like at his waist, and they're like, oh gee, and they like walk away. And it's not such a focused, treatise on masculinity, but it is taking accepted forms of masculinity and being like, this is empty too.
Yeah, and one sort of related thing I want to talk about is Carrie Fisher, her character and her performance, because I think one of my questions I had lingering after this is she kind of wasted?
Yeah.
But even as we're talking, and that point being made about these really being boys, if you kind of see what she's doing as this really interesting character that's supposed to be his wife, but ultimately she, in her scenes, it's more like the typical suburban mother scenes that we see. So like in the beginning when she's like feeding them breakfast basically. And especially with Art, he's just like sitting there just
eating
devouring this breakfast that she's putting together.
And he puts an empty syrup bottle back in the fridge. Like, so, I mean, he is so childish.
When I kind of started seeing that as like, there's a point being made here where she has to mother these boys.
Yeah.
Like this isn't a marriage. This is her being a mother to these boys. And that's, I think, an intentional point being made. She's just sort of like telling them eventually like what they have to do, like we're going to go to that house and we're going to go say hi to them. It's almost like saying,
no, you don't get to play with your friends. We're going on vacation. Yeah.
And that's a tightrope to walk as well, because that could be a very naggy character and she's not a nag.
Right. No, she isn't. I think that's one of the more amazing things about her character is that she doesn't come across as a killjoy. She comes across as the voice of reason.
Right.
You brought up Breaking Bad. A lot of people see Skyler as one of the bad guys. And it's like, hang on, man.
Right. She's the voice of reason here.
Right.
Yeah.
Like her husband is a drug dealer and like murderer. And she's not supposed to be upset about that. Yeah, she doesn't nag. And I think it's also, Corey Feldman's character, Ricky's parents are gone, and Art's wife is gone.
Yes.
And this is just sort of like his unsupervised time. And Ricky's actually getting the house painted. Art is just like, oh, my mom's not home. And that's part of why he's eating so much at Ray's house, because he's clearly not cooking for himself.
Right, he's got to come over to eat basically, and then even it's like we just saw that scene in there in the garage, and he's basically like, "Hey, you want to go get one of those beef sandwiches for lunch?"
Go to the deli. Yeah. So I think one of the things that is a quote unquote knock against the movie is just subtle about those things.
Yeah,
these are just accepted. Like, hey, look at these men childs. I don't know what you say, men children. And what's difficult, and this is always difficult when you have sort of a quote unquote anti-hero, which is maybe a little bit too strong of a word for what these characters are, when they are your protagonists. But then it's like, oh, but they're so annoying. They're just like so immature and they're doing the wrong thing. And it's like, right, they are. Why are they the main character then? Like, because you almost expect Tom Hanks to be, and especially going back, knowing Tom Hanks as we do, you expect him to be the guy who's like, Art, this is a bad idea. But he's like, I think you're right.
But
let's do this.
But to me, that's such a great thought also on masculinity. Like he is playing the everyman. He doesn't have the paranoia initially that they have.
Yeah.
But it's actually, I think, more saying like, this is how boys and men act. Yeah. Like if you get enough of them together and you're outnumbered and they're telling you like, this is how you should think. And this is what you should, this is really what's going on here. And you're just not seeing it.
This podcast just got serious. This is like happening to terrifying degrees
Yeah.
to the country right now.
But like you just get a bunch of boys and men together and they just start talking
They'll
and
storm the Capitol.
Even the people who you think would be the sane ones, they're going to go down the road of paranoia and the road of conspiracy theories. Because it's just more fun and it's just more exciting.
Right. I don't know. The more we talk about it, it is pretty like perfect for what it's doing, you know?
Yeah. Well, okay, so why was I hesitant?
Yeah, right.
To be
Me
so positive on it. And part of it I think is just a level of clunkiness in the way that it moves along. Like,
definitely.
And maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
I don't know, because there was like one scene where Ray has beers with Ricky and Art on Art's porch. And then it's kind of supposed to be the same scene. Ricky has his girlfriend over on his porch. And like Ray, it's like, I couldn't tell if that was supposed to be the same night or not.
Right. It's that consistency type stuff where there's also like when Carrie Fisher comes back.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think their son's even in the car. And also like there is sort of, we didn't even talk about how like they have a son.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of there. He comes and goes. And yeah, so there was just these moments where I'm like, is there a longer cut of this movie that makes a little bit more sense?
I wonder. The only thing I can say is that the movie doesn't click. Never really hits a rhythm.
Yeah.
And it also feels a disconnect among the performers. Like, I don't believe Art and Ray as a pair of friends. I think Bruce Dern is funny in this, but I don't think he's funny in exactly the way that the movie sort of needs him to be funny. I think Tom Hanks throws himself fully into it, and he's one of the people who embodies it probably the most. But I just feel like whatever they needed, more rehearsal time, more drafts of the script. Now, this script was kind of like rushed because there was a writer's strike at the time. So they weren't actually able to make changes to the script once they started filming. Were there just things that they couldn't find a harmony and a rhythm that just make the movie feel less cohesive, less harmonious?
Yeah.
To really make me at the end of it go like, yes, that was a good movie.
Right. You know, and it makes a lot of sense how you compared this to Shaun of the Dead, which I feel like really has a rhythm to it.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Really just has like a momentum.
Edgar Wright can't film without rhythm.
But it just sort of like holds together as a really cohesive unit.
Right.
That Shaun and Ed relationship is something that's a constant the whole way through. And the horror elements are like more evenly distributed, whereas I feel like in this movie it's a little more herky-jerky. Like, here's a few scenes of suburbia, let's go back to the horror thing. I just feel like it shifts between the genres a little bit more than just making something that's just sort of a good amalgam of the two things, you know, the sort of suburban satire with the horror.
Well, and I think I saw someplace that it might have been the IMDb trivia that Tom Hanks and Rick Ducommun didn't get along on set. But that Tom Hanks was like a professional and whatever.
Of course. It's Hanksgiving.
Of course.
It's not Tom Hanks' fault.
This Rick bastard.
This falls on Rick.
Not that actors can't be good. Maybe, you know, no offense to Rick Ducommun, but maybe he's just not as good an actor to be able to fake that, you know? And there was like an incongruity between them. Whereas I think Tom Hanks and Carrie Fisher do have very good on-screen chemistry.
Right.
And so you're sort of like, I don't understand why Ray would feel more affinity with Art than he would with Carol, his wife. And so it's just those sorts of uneven, again, it's just not clicking.
Right.
It just doesn't click. And that to me is where it's like, would it keep it from being a 4-star? Like it would stay at 3.5 just because, there's a lot going on and a lot to talk about, and I like it, and I would watch it again, and I would love to see it in a group setting. But that's more about the experience of watching the Burbs rather than the Burbs itself as a movie, you know?
But I do like the
movie.
I like the movie, and I like the Ray and Art
do
dynamic,
too.
even though it doesn't fully work all the time. Like, I think, and I do think Rick Ducommun does a pretty good job of like
he's great
just
as
playing
that
character. I mean, you almost just feel like he should have a lollipop in his mouth half the time, you know, when he's talking. Like, the way I interpreted the whole relationship between Ray and Art in the Burbs is that these aren't people who would necessarily be friends if they didn't live next to each other.
Sure. Okay.
And Ray, at first, I feel like is just kind of okay with him.
Right.
He's like fine with him, and then over
He's
time,
a little irritated
and then
by, you know.
and then over time, Art just keeps goading him towards this, and then they kind of need each other.
Yeah, right.
And then,
they get in too deep.
Yeah, right.
It was avoidable.
And it's the same with this Mark character, which that's another interesting thing about the movie is these people all at the beginning seem to be living more separated lives from each other. And it takes this paranoia and conspiracy theory
Right.
to kind of bring them together. Now, what does that tell you about things like QAnon and
Right, yeah,
like this is a unifying bonding type thing that happens.
Is
that
all unity good? Right. Yeah. Yeah.
like they don't have a lot in common with each other, really, other
Right.
than that they all live in the burbs,
Right.
and then they're all seeing the same thing,
Right.
You know,
And maybe they would have interpreted it differently, but now they're kind of just like thinking alike.
so. As we kind of wrap up here,
Yeah.
what other things should we point out about what Tom Hanks does in The Burbs? How does this stack up for you as a Tom Hanks movie?
Well, I like it as a Tom Hanks movie, actually,
Yeah.
a lot. I think it's one of the movies that gives us the best of both worlds. Not the best of like serious Tom Hanks. He's never very serious, but the realism of Tom Hanks and the, like I said before, the crazy Hanks.
Yeah.
Where he gets that opportunity to just go wild, almost like Woody, like kind of like
Yeah.
this is a live action cartoon Tom Hanks performance.
That's a good comparison, I think.
And there's some physical comedy that he's really good at in this that I don't think he shows off all that often. Like I talked about the scene where he comes out of the house after it exploded and he just kind of like slides down the stairs on his feet. I actually watched it a couple times because I'm like, what did he do with his feet there? And as a Tom Hanks movie, I don't know how high I rate it, but as a Tom Hanks performance, it's a very fun one. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really fun Tom Hanks movie, and you're right. You get a pretty dynamic Hanks performance. You get a lot of different sides, and then there's even like a little bit of like foreshadowing of what he would become with Mr. Rogers, showing Mr. Rogers in there. You know?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. He sings a song. He sings along.
So you see that, like, you know, what could happen when you're watching something from someone like Tom Hanks and it's not one of his better known movies or more renowned movies, is where you wonder, like, is it going to feel like a Tom Hanks movie, or is it just going to feel like Tom Hanks in a movie? And I think it feels like a Tom Hanks movie. I feel like he brings enough of himself into this character to where it is hard to kind of imagine how anyone else would play it other than Tom Hanks.
I don't think the movie would play as well if it weren't Tom Hanks, because Ray would be a lot less likable. I think just Tom Hanks brings a level of likability that the movie is able to deplete for a lot longer than you could with another actor. And still like him by the end. So yeah, I think it's a great T. Hanksgiving pick. It's one that I don't know what to do with. This is why Letterboxd ratings are dumb.
Right.
Because I would recommend this movie and I would watch it again, but I don't think too highly of it.
Sure.
And maybe that's what I was talking about. Take it seriously enough to watch it again, pass it on, but not so serious that I'm actually trying to figure out how to rate it.
I mean, yeah, exactly. And it's a great time.
It is.
It's a really fun time.
This is a little bit of Tom Hanks history made in this movie. This was the first time, I saw this on IMDb trivia, the first time Tom Hanks played a dad in a movie.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
And he was afraid that it was going to start to get him typecast as a father. And he is America's dad now.
Right.
I would say.
He's embraced it, but he's still taking roles where he's not playing the father figure.
Yeah. And he's not much of a father in this. So
the kid's just kind of there.
Yeah. So technically his first role as a dad, but probably Sleepless in Seattle is the first time we see him be a father.
A real father.
A dad. Yeah.
So, I guess if people might check my Letterboxd, then I'll probably put it as a 4 because it's fun.
Yeah, I might.
Fun movie.
Yeah, in the spirit of T. Hanksgiving, we'll give it the T. Hanksgiving bump.
The bump, yep.
Up to 4 stars.
Great gap year choice as well. I feel like this was a good gap to fill in our Hanksography.
Yeah.
So I guess another T. Hanksgiving in the can.
Yeah.
The can of cranberries.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what we're going to do for our next episode.
Right. I mean, we are going to be taking a little bit of a break.
Right.
Like
so we're not doing a holiday movie.
Yeah. So, and actually,
we're shortening our 3-month celebration.
Yeah. So we'll be taking December off, and we'll be kicking back up in the new year. It tends to be the time when we really do every year try to catch up on what the year has been in film, what's kind of been recommended, and what we feel like we should see.
Right.
And so I think we're going to just do that. And so we're going to wait.
Yeah. In years past, we've done like a year in review. Last year, we just took January off. But a lot of movies come out in November and December, and things start sort of ramping up. So we're just going to see how inspiration strikes us
Right.
over the holidays. And we will let you know what we plan on doing for our January episode.
So be on the lookout. Maybe we'll do like a little mini episode announcing what we're going to do. I'm thinking hopefully we'll see some movie that we both are like, yes, let's talk about this movie from this year. And also, you could always follow us on Letterboxd and you'll probably see some of our catching up that we're doing in the moment. We'll put our links to our Letterboxd accounts in the show notes if you're interested in following.
Yeah. And if you've got any suggestions.
Yeah. Even though we're taking the time off, we definitely, our lines are open. We want to hear what you think about the Burbs. We want to hear what you think about Hanksgiving. What Hanksgiving movies are you catching up with over this celebration month? Mm-hmm. But also, the year in film. What have you watched? What have you loved? What kind of stuff would you want us to talk about? We would love to hear your suggestions. So to listen to or comment on this or any of our past episodes or any of the things I just talked about, find us at canwestillbefriends.net or email us at feedback@canwestillbefriends.net. You can find us on Facebook at Can We Still Be Friends Podcast, or Instagram and Threads at Can We Still Be Friends Pod. And if you'd like to leave us a voice message and be featured on the podcast, call us at 847-306-9532, or you can always email us a voice memo.
Yeah, as always, we'd love it if you could subscribe and leave us a rating or a review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you are listening to this, because those ratings really help spread the word about our show. Can We Still Be Friends is written and produced by Ryan Ebling and Nate Goss and edited by Nate Goss. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next year.